Number 10. The attic closet. I was perhaps 7 years old, and my room, which was really just an attached annex to the attic, previously a playroom for the home's former owners, was on its own separate floor. This isolation was the first source of my childhood fear. The second source was the huge closet door that led directly into the attic. It was elevated, requiring a short climb up a set of wooden stairs to reach, and secured by a large sliding door. It was crammed full of my old toys and accumulated junk. Young as I was, I always felt acutely separated from my family downstairs, with that looming closet at my back. One night, after watching a scary movie with my parents, I was lying awake in bed, nervous. The silence was suddenly broken by the distinct sound of a toy shifting inside the closet. I leaped out of bed and fled to my parents' room. They assured me no one was there, but seeing my absolute terror, they let me sleep with them. The following night, the incident had slipped my mind until it happened again, the unmistakable loud clatter of a container of Legos spilling everywhere inside the closet. Again, I ran to my parents. My father was clearly impatient, but he grudgingly allowed me to stay. The next day, my mother and I checked the closet. Sure enough, a pile of Legos lay scattered on the elevated floor, having clearly fallen from their container. I took this as proof of an intruder. My mother calmly assured me the container had simply tipped over. That night, my dad, tired of the nonsense, locked their door. Unable to sleep, I lay in the dark, my young imagination running wild, straining to hear another sound from the closet. After what felt like an hour, the silence shattered. There was a tremendous crashing sound as the heavy closet door was violently rolled open. Moonlight streaming through my window illuminated a dark figure standing at the threshold of the closet. A wave of pure bone-chilling terror, a feeling I remember vividly to this day, swept over me, and I let out the most horrific ear-piercing scream you could imagine. The figure vaulted down from the closet floor, ran across my room, and bolted out the front door of the house. My mom rushed upstairs in shock as my dad raced down to catch the person, but he was gone. The police were called, but the man was never apprehended. Number 9. The piano player at Myrtle's plantation. During 8th grade, I went on a school trip called the Louisiana Tour, which involved visiting historical sites in the southern part of the state. One of our stops was Myrtle's plantation, renowned as one of the most haunted places in the country. We were standing in one of the rooms as part of a large group, listening to the tour guide. I don't recall what she was talking about, but as I stood there, I began to hear a quiet, rhythmic sound, like someone gently hitting a single piano key. I listened again. Tap. 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 I scanned the room, looking for a piano, but saw nothing. I asked the friends nearest me if they heard it. They all said no. I pointed out, there it is again, but they seemed to think I was imagining things. I returned to looking around the room. Everyone's attention was fixed on the guide, except for one older woman. Our eyes met. She caught my attention, pointed a finger at me, and then pointed to her ear with a questioning look. I immediately understood, she heard it too. I nodded back. At that exact moment, the tour guide began a story about a soldier who had died on the property. She explained that he had been a piano player, and multiple guests had reported hearing him play in the middle of the night. I didn't know what to think, and honestly, I still don't. As we were leaving the room, I spoke to the woman. She confirmed she heard the exact same intermittent piano key sound, but neither her husband nor her son had heard a thing. Number 8. The Midnight Hike. It was near Halloween. My friends and I were gathered, sharing ghost stories. My friend told us she was going to share a story about her parents' first date. She admitted she hated telling it because it was actually true, but we urged her to continue. Her parents had a pleasant, if slightly awkward, first date. When it came time to say goodnight, her dad, who knew the area well from rock climbing, suggested a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. They drove to the mouth of the canyon, got out, and began hiking by the dim light of the stars. It was a new moon, so it was incredibly dark. As they walked, her dad suddenly got a powerful, unsettling feeling. The path ahead passed under a thick canopy of trees, making the darkness absolute, and it was very late. He dismissed the feeling and pressed on. A minute later, the feeling came back, stronger. He ignored it again and walked a few steps into the trees when his foot struck something soft and yielding in the middle of the path. It was too dark to see what it was, but the bad feeling instantly intensified into full-blown dread. Instead of investigating, he and the woman simultaneously agreed they had to get out of there. They turned and hastily retreated down the trail. Years later, after they were married, they were watching a televised interview with the notorious serial killer, Ted Bundy. When asked to describe the time he felt closest to being caught, Bundy recounted a night when he had lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her. As he was hiding the body, he heard people approaching the trail. He quickly hid in the trees just in time, only to watch a guy walk right into the body, and then, for some inexplicable reason, simply turn around and walk away. Number 7. The Stacks. My university library stays open until 2 a.m., catering to last-minute essay writers like me. It's a small building, and most of the collection is in the basement, known as the Stacks. The layout is simple: the main stairs down, a vending machine room, and a long hallway with 4 entrances into the Stacks. The Stacks themselves consist of 2 very large rooms opposite the hallway, filled with countless bookshelves and small study desks built into the walls. Last year, around 11 p.m., I was deep in the Stacks working on a research-intensive essay, utilizing one of the desks so I wouldn't have to constantly run upstairs. I'd been there for maybe 2 hours. Everyone else had left, except for one boy working a few desks away from me. I was completely zoned out, panicking over an 8 a.m. deadline. It was intensely irritating when I started hearing a loud rhythmic sound. Someone was flipping through book pages very fast, creating a loud whipping noise at the far end of the room. I tried to ignore it, hoping they'd stop, but it continued for about 5 minutes. Finally fed up, I stood up and took 3 steps toward the sound, intending to tell them to knock it off. It stopped instantly. I sat back down, and silence returned for about 10 minutes. Then, the flipping noise started again, only this time it was much louder, as if someone had grabbed a massive book. The boy near me was getting visibly annoyed too. He stood up and started walking through the bookshelves to find the source. The noise was now impossible to ignore and clearly coming from a specific area. I got up to join his search. He was on one side of the shelves, and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the aisle toward the sound. No one was there. We hadn't seen anyone enter the Stacks, and we were near the entrances. There was no way anyone could have come in unseen. The noise stopped again. We slowly walked back to our seats, and I tried to convince myself it was just a fan in the other room. I desperately needed to finish my essay. The moment we sat down, the noise started again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his papers into his bag, looked at me, said, "I'm out of here," and took off. I was maybe 5 seconds behind him. To this day, I will not go back into the Stacks at night, even if other people are there. Number 6. The Men on the Sea. This is a horrifying experience that happened to my wife and I when I still owned my fishing boat, and it remains with me forever. We had departed from the East Coast for a 2-day fishing trip in the North Atlantic. The first day and night were normal. We caught a decent amount of fish and spent the evening playing cards and listening to music. The second night, after a slow day, we were playing cards inside the cabin, but this time without music. It was then we heard the distinct sound of a boat motor. We rushed outside and saw a crappy, old motorboat stopped dead in front of our bow. The boat had absolutely no lights on. The pilot was a middle-aged man with a beard and a baseball cap. I approached and asked if he needed assistance. He asked if we had any spare gasoline. I apologized and said no. I then asked if he was low on fuel and needed a ride back to shore, but he declined, claiming he had plenty of gas. This created an awkward silence. My wife and I wondered why he asked for fuel if he didn't need it. The way he just blankly stared at me started to creep us out. The only reason I could see him at all was the deck light on the front of our boat, otherwise, we were engulfed in total darkness. Finally, he broke the silence and asked about our catch. I told him it was poor, trying to remain polite despite the bizarre situation. When I asked him how he was navigating in the darkness, he simply gave a short chuckle, as if I had made a joke. He turned his small motorboat around and said, "Nice meeting you folks," before sailing off into the absolute blackness. My wife and I were completely weirded out. She was afraid he intended to rob us. As a fisherman, you meet and chat with other sailors constantly, but I knew something was deeply off about this guy, coming up to us so late, so far from shore, alone in that tiny boat, and his strange demeanor. We were both so uncomfortable that I decided to turn out all our lights and sail a bit north, just to make sure he couldn't find us again. I woke up around 2 a.m. to my wife's disturbing ear-piercing scream. I shot up to see him standing at the edge of our bed. I lunged out of the bunk toward him, but he was out of the cabin and off the boat before I could even clear the room. I immediately heard the sound of that same little motorboat starting up and speeding away into the darkness. We sailed straight back to shore that night and reported the incident immediately. Of course, nothing ever came of it. We still have no idea what the man wanted or what his plan was, but the memory still gives me nightmares. Number 5, the malicious stare. The layout of my room featured a small alcove directly across from my bed. This corner was completely dark because the closet was slightly positioned in front of it, blocking all light from the ceiling and any ambient light from outside. I was in my 4th year of high school, trying to fall asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. You know that prickling sensation? It was that, but magnified. It felt like whatever was staring at me held pure malicious intent. I opened my eyes, and my gaze was drawn instantly to that dark corner. There, I saw a hazy darker-than-dark outline in the shadows. Goosebumps covered my skin, but I tried to rationalize it as imagination and closed my eyes, desperately trying to force myself to sleep and shake off that evil sensation. Then, there was a faint creaking sound, the sound of pressure being placed on the floorboards. I snapped my eyes open, and that shadowy thing was now in the opposite corner of the room. All my inner alarms went ballistic. I pulled my pillow and blanket over my head, curled up, and cried myself to sleep, praying that the figure wouldn't come any closer. I know for a fact I didn't dream or imagine it, and it still sends shivers down my spine today. Number 4, the zip tent. It was the first time my family had ever gone camping together. I was 18, and my brother and sister, who are twins, were 11. It was mid-July, and I was genuinely excited. We drove out to the country, bypassing campgrounds. My dad just parked on the side of a quiet road, and we hiked about a mile into the woods until we found a small clearing. We pitched 2 tents, one for me and my siblings, and one for my parents. That night, I couldn't fall asleep at all. Trying to get comfortable in the sleeping bag felt impossible. I tossed and turned for hours while my brother and sister slept soundly. Then, I heard the sound of the zipper on our tent zipping down. I looked up and saw someone poking their head into the tent. "Dad," I whispered. Whoever it was removed their head. "Dad," I said louder. The person quickly moved away from the tent, leaving the zipper completely undone. Confused, I crawled out of the tent and walked over to my parents' tent. I unzipped it and slipped inside. Both my parents were in their sleeping bags. I shook my dad awake and asked if he had just checked on us. "No," he said. The word sent a chill down my spine. I woke up my mum, hoping it had been her. Groggily, she told me she hadn't left the tent either. I got goosebumps all over as the realization hit me. A stranger, some sort of psycho, for all I knew, had walked right up to our tent, unzipped it, and peered inside. I don't recall if my parents fully grasped the seriousness of what happened, but I do remember that I didn't get a minute of sleep the rest of that night. Number 3, the painter on the honeymoon. My parents were on their honeymoon in Key West. When they checked into the hotel, they were initially assigned a non-smoking room. Since my dad was a smoker, they requested a different one. After the room change, they went to their new floor. Stepping off the elevator, the smell of fresh paint was overpowering. Down the hall, there was a man, a painter, with all his supplies laid out, working on the wall. My parents walked past and casually greeted him, but the painter offered absolutely no acknowledgement of their presence. When they reached their room, the smell of paint was even worse, so bad it was unbearable. They immediately decided to go back to the front desk to change rooms again. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked completely confused. She informed them that there was no scheduled paint job on that floor for the day, but she agreed to move them. My parents went back up to grab their luggage. In the span of 10 minutes, the painter was completely gone. All supplies were cleaned up, and the heavy smell of paint was also gone. My parents were deeply freaked out but didn't dwell on it, moving into their new room. The next morning, on their way to breakfast, they overheard a tour guide talking to a group. They tuned in when the guide mentioned the floor they had originally been assigned to. Apparently, a long time ago, a painter was working on that floor and fell down the elevator shaft to his death. My parents are not believers in the paranormal, but after an event they had no logical explanation for, it genuinely shook them up. Number 2, closet intruder on Skype. This story didn't happen to me, but to my cousin, Nikki, and it still freaks me out. Nikki was on a video call with his girlfriend, Sam, around 1 a.m. on a Friday night. Sam was asking him to come over, but he was reluctant to drive so late. About a half hour into their conversation, Nikki noticed the closet door behind Sam open a crack. He pointed it out, Sam turned, looked, and they both dismissed it. Probably a draft. Another half hour later, the closet door had creaked open even more. Nikki spotted it again and suggested her little brother must be hiding inside. She denied it, again blaming an open window or a draft. Then, about another half hour after that, the closet door swung completely open, and somebody stepped out of the closet and walked out of Sam's bedroom door. Sam seemed not to notice, but Nikki was terrified by what he'd just seen. He frantically told her little brother had definitely been hiding in her closet. What she said next scared Nikki senseless. "I'm home alone tonight." Nikki started yelling at the screen, telling her to lock her door and call the police, and that he was driving over as fast as he could. Sam finally started to grasp the situation as she turned and saw her closet door wide open. She ran to her bedroom doorway, let out a blood-curdling scream, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Nikki drove over while calling the police. When he arrived, the front door was unlocked. He ran inside and up to Sam's room. He knocked and yelled that it was him, but she wouldn't answer. When the police arrived, they busted open the door to find her curled up in the corner of the room, completely in shock. She later told the police she had seen somebody standing face to face with her at the doorway just before she slammed the door shut. Number 1, the rock on the window. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind I loved, with roaring thunder and lightning. I was staying up late watching movies. My dad, who I lived with, was working a night shift and wasn't home. After finishing Forrest Gump for the 100th time, I decided 2 a.m. was a good time to get some sleep. I enjoyed drifting off to the sound of thunderstorms. Suddenly, I heard the sound of something hitting my window. It wasn't the rain. Given the severity of the storm, I didn't think much of it and put my head back down. A few seconds later, the same noise, something hit the window again. This time, I identified the sound as a rock. My heart started racing. It couldn't be my dad, he would call if he needed something. Another rock hit the glass. I was frozen in bed. I didn't want to look, but whoever was outside surely knew I was awake. I had just turned off the bright glare of the TV. I tried to ignore it, hoping they would leave. Another rock. and then another. The pace was accelerating. The rain started to lighten, and that's when I heard the sound of a truck engine running down in the street. A much louder thump against the window was my breaking point. I scrambled out of bed, planning to call the cops. I ran downstairs toward the phone, but as I passed the front door, I caught a glimpse of something through the glass window at the top, the face of a person looking through. To my horror, it seemed like they had a smile on their face. I sprinted to the kitchen and called the police. They assured me an officer was nearby and would arrive shortly. Whoever was at the door began fiddling with the doorknob, and then started ramming into the door, trying to bust it open. I grabbed a kitchen knife for protection and yelled that the police were coming before running back upstairs to my room. After about a minute, the ramming stopped, and the rock stopped hitting my window. I still didn't dare look out. I just remember hearing the sound of the truck drive off a few minutes later. Moments after that, I heard a police siren outside and then the doorbell rang. I explained everything to the officer, describing the face as best as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't give him any information about the vehicle. I still regret not taking a quick look. There was never enough information for the police to catch the people. I'm not sure if their intention was robbery or something much worse.